The spaceport never truly slept. Even in the dead hours between midnight and dawn, the great landing platforms of Vero Station hummed with quiet life. Cargo loaders rolled slowly between docked ships. Fuel lines hissed and clicked as they fed the bellies of interstellar freighters. Lights blinked in long steady rhythms across the tarmac, orange and white and pale blue, stretching out to the dark edges of the station where the open sky began. Ethan walked those edges every night. He was a maintenance technician, one of the quiet ones who kept the station running while everyone else slept or celebrated or argued over trade deals in the upper halls. He carried a worn tool belt and a battered diagnostic pad, and he knew every pipe, every panel, and every loose bolt on the outer docks better than he knew his own small quarters on level 3. He was not the kind of man people noticed. He did his work, he did it well, and he went home without any fuss. That night, he was finishing a check on the eastern drainage vents when the wind changed. It came fast, the way bad weather always did on Veros. One moment the air was dry and still. The next, the sky turned the color of an old bruise, deep purple and greenish yellow at the edges, rolling in from the far mountains beyond the station perimeter. Ethan looked up and felt the first drop hit the back of his hand. He pulled his hand back immediately. It stung. A sharp, clean sting, like the tip of a heated wire pressed briefly against the skin. Acid rain. He had seen it twice before in his 4 years at Vero Station, and both times the evacuation alarms had sounded with enough time for everyone to get inside. But tonight the storm had come without any warning at all. The alarms began screaming only seconds after the first drops fell, and by then the rain was already thickening, coming down in pale gray sheets across the outer platforms. Ethan ran. All around him, ground crew were sprinting for the covered bays. Ships that had been sitting open on the platforms began closing their hatches. Lights shifted from steady white to emergency red along the walkways. The rain drummed harder against the metal floor, and where it hit, tiny threads of pale smoke curled up from the surface. Ethan was nearly at the door of Maintenance Bay 7 when he heard it. He stopped running. He stood in the rain with drops burning cold against the back of his neck and his shoulders, and he listened. The alarm was loud. The rain was loud. The distant sound of ships sealing and engines warming was loud. But underneath all of it, thin and sharp and desperate, was something else entirely. A cry. Not the cry of a machine or a pressure valve or a damaged hull panel. He knew all of those sounds. This was different. This was small, and frightened, and alive. Ethan turned around. He went back out into the rain. The drops hit his arms and the tops of his hands and the side of his face, and each one stung, but he pulled his collar up and kept moving, following the sound toward the outer edge of Dock 14, where the loading platforms jutted out past the main roof cover and sat fully open to the sky. Nobody went out there during a storm. There was no reason to. There was nothing stored out there except empty container frames and old tie-down cables coiled against the barrier wall. He found her between 2 empty containers. She was tiny. Smaller than he had expected, curled up tight against the base of the barrier wall as if she was trying to make herself as small as possible. Her scales were pale, almost white, the color of old bone or sea foam, and they were not hard the way adult Draveth scales were. They were soft, thin, and still forming, lying flat against her body like wet paper. Her wings were folded in close, trembling. Her tail was wrapped around her own small body. Her eyes were shut tight. And the rain was falling directly on her. Ethan could see it happening. Where the drops landed on her soft scales, they left tiny dark marks, spreading slowly like ink on wet cloth. Her body flinched with each drop, a small helpless shudder that she could not control, and from somewhere deep in her throat came that thin, desperate cry, over and over, quiet and exhausted and frightened. She had been out here for a while. Ethan did not stop to think about what she was or where she had come from or why she was alone in an open dock during an acid storm. He did not stop to think about regulations or species protocols or who he was supposed to call. He reached up, unclipped his outer jacket, and pulled it off in one motion. The rain hit his arms immediately, sharp and stinging, but he barely felt it. He crouched down in front of the hatchling and opened the jacket wide, and then he reached forward slowly, carefully, the way he moved when he was working around exposed wiring, deliberate and steady and without any sudden motion. He slipped his hands gently under her small body and lifted her from the wet ground. She flinched hard when he touched her. A sharp sound came from her, high and frightened, and her claws scratched weakly at his forearms. But she was too cold and too tired and too hurt to fight, and after one moment of panic she went still against his hands. He wrapped the jacket around her completely, folding it close and tucking it in at the edges so the rain could not reach her. He held her against his chest and curved his body over her to shield her from above, and then he stood up and ran. The dock doors were 40 meters away. He covered the distance fast, head down, rain burning the back of his neck and soaking through his shirt, and he hit the door panel with his elbow and pushed through into the covered bay. The door sealed behind him. The sound of the rain became a dull roar against the roof. The burning stopped. The air inside was warm and still and smelled of machine oil and recycled air, and Ethan stood just inside the door, breathing hard, and looked down at the bundle in his arms. Two pale golden eyes looked back up at him. She had opened them sometime during the run. They were large for her face, wide and bright, catching the light of the bay in thin rings of gold around dark centers. She was still shaking. Her small body trembled steadily against his chest, and her breathing came in short, shallow pulls. But she was looking at him. Not with fear, not anymore. With something quieter than fear. Something careful and uncertain and very, very tired. Ethan looked back at her for a long moment. Then he pulled the jacket a little tighter around her small shoulders and walked deeper into the bay, toward the warmth of the equipment lockers and the emergency supply cabinet on the far wall. He had work to do. The emergency supply cabinet was old and the latch stuck the way it always did. Ethan yanked it open with one hand while keeping the hatchling pressed carefully against his chest with the other arm. The cabinet was not well stocked. It had been meant for human injuries, small cuts and chemical splashes and the occasional burn from a faulty fuel coupling. There was a roll of clean gauze, a bottle of neutral flush solution, a small tube of burn salve rated for mild acid contact, and a silver thermal blanket folded flat at the bottom. He looked at what he had. Then he looked down at the pale hatchling tucked against him. She was still shaking. Her breathing had steadied a little since they came inside, but her small body trembled in long slow waves that he could feel against his arm. The jacket was doing its job keeping the cold out, but the damage was already done. Through the open fold of fabric he could see the marks the rain had left on her soft scales, dark patches spread unevenly across her neck and the top of her folded wings, and along the thin skin of her underbelly where the scales had not grown in thick enough to offer any protection at all. He carried everything to the long work bench at the center of the bay and set it all down carefully. Then he cleared a space, folded the thermal blanket twice to make a flat padded surface, and laid the hatchling down gently on top of it. She made a small sound when he set her down. Not a cry. Not quite. Something smaller than that. A soft, tight sound that came from the back of her throat and said, without any words at all, that she was hurting and she was tired and she did not know what was happening to her. Ethan pulled up a low stool and sat down in front of her. He did not rush. He had learned a long time ago that rushing was how people made mistakes, and right now there was no room for mistakes. He looked at the burns carefully, starting at her neck and working his way down, cataloging each dark patch the way he cataloged faults on a damaged hull panel, quietly and thoroughly and without panic. The burns were not deep. That was the first good thing he found. The acid had not had long enough to work its way through, and her soft scales, thin as they were, had slowed it down. But they were wide, spreading across more of her surface than he had initially seen, and the skin beneath some of the darker patches was raw and angry-looking, pink and tight. He uncapped the neutral flush solution. He poured a small amount onto a piece of clean gauze, and then he reached toward her slowly, making sure she could see his hand coming before it arrived. He had no idea how much she understood. She was newborn, or close to it, and he did not know how quickly Dravath hatchlings developed awareness. But her eyes followed his hand as it moved, and that was enough. He pressed the damp gauze gently against the first burn on her neck. She flinched. A sharp full-body flinch, her claws scraping against the thermal blanket, her tail pulling in tight. The sound she made was short and high, and it went straight through Ethan like a cold wire. He did not pull back. He kept the gauze steady and spoke to her in a low, even voice, the same voice he used when he was talking a nervous apprentice through a repair they had never done before. He told her it was going to sting for a moment, but that the sting meant it was working. He told her she was doing well. He told her she was safe inside now and the rain could not reach her anymore. She probably did not understand a single word. But she stopped flinching. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on his face while he worked, wide and unblinking, tracking every small movement he made. He cleaned each burn slowly and carefully, working from her neck down across her shoulders and wings and along the pale soft skin of her belly, flushing each patch until the tissue looked clean. She flinched twice more, both times on the worst patches near her underbelly, and both times she recovered quickly and went back to watching him with those steady golden eyes. She never snapped at him. Not once. He had expected it. He would not have blamed her. She was hurt and frightened, and he was a creature she had never seen before, handling her in a place she had never been. Any animal in that situation, on any world, would have bitten first and asked questions later. But she did not. She lay on the thermal blanket and she watched him and she let him work, and Ethan found that more remarkable than almost anything he had ever seen in his 4 years at Vero Station. When the cleaning was done, he applied the burn salve carefully across every affected area, spreading it thin with the tip of one finger. It was formulated for human skin, but the base compound was neutral enough that he was reasonably confident it would not cause a reaction. The salve was cool and she relaxed slightly as he spread it, the long trembling waves moving through her body becoming shorter and less frequent. He folded the edges of the thermal blanket up around her when he was finished. She was warmer now. He could see it in the way she held herself, a little less tight, a little less curled in. Her breathing had slowed and deepened. Her eyes were still open, but the frantic brightness in them had softened into something calmer. Ethan sat back on his stool and looked at her properly for the first time since he had brought her in. She was pale all the way through. Not just her scales, but the skin between them, the membrane of her folded wings, even the small curved claws at the end of her feet. All of it the same washed-out white, like something that had been bleached clean of color. He had seen Dravath before, traders and crew passing through the station, and their scales ran in deep colors, bronze and green and dark red and black. He had never seen one this pale. And then he noticed something else. He leaned forward slightly, and he breathed in through his nose, slow and deliberate. Every Dravath he had ever been near carried a scent. It was something the clan marked onto their young, a biological signature pressed into the scales in the first hours after hatching, identifying clan and bloodline and origin point. Every trader, every crew member, every diplomat he had processed through Veros carried that scent whether they knew it or not. This hatchling had nothing. No scent at all beyond the clean sharp smell of the flush solution and the faint metallic tang of the rain. Her scales were completely unmarked. No clan had pressed their signature into her. No bloodline had claimed her. Ethan sat very still for a moment. A lost hatchling might have had her scent washed away by the storm. He considered that. He turned it over carefully and honestly in his mind, the way he turned over any problem he was trying to solve fairly. But a lost hatchling would have been reported missing. And no alert had come through his station comms all evening. He looked at her again, pale and small and warming slowly inside the folded blanket, her golden eyes finally beginning to grow heavy with exhaustion. She had not wandered away from someone. she had been put down and walked away from. Ethan reached out and rested 2 fingers very lightly against the top of her head, between the 2 small ridges where her horns would eventually grow. She did not flinch. She made a low, barely audible sound, almost too quiet to be called anything, and her eyes closed the rest of the way. He left his fingers resting there until her breathing evened out completely. Then he sat back, folded his arms, and started thinking. The message came through at dawn. Ethan had not slept. He had spent the remaining dark hours sitting on his stool beside the workbench, checking the hatchling's burns every hour, adjusting the thermal blanket when she shifted in her sleep, and running quiet searches on his diagnostic pad about Dravith hatchling care. Most of what he found was written for Dravith readers and assumed the reader already knew things he did not. But he pieced together enough to know she needed warmth, hydration, and rest, and that the burns, while painful, were not going to cause permanent damage if treated early. He had done all of that. She was still sleeping when the message arrived on his station comms, short and formal and cold as the rain outside. It was from Spaceport reception. A Dravith elder had arrived at the main gate and was requesting immediate access to Maintenance Bay 7. The message did not say please. It did not say why. It simply said the elder was waiting and that Ethan was expected to present himself and the creature in his care without delay. Ethan read the message twice. Then he set his diagnostic pad face down on the bench, stood up, and looked at the hatchling. She was curled on her side now, her pale wings folded loosely, her breathing slow and even. The salve on her burns had done its work through the night and the dark patches had lightened considerably. She looked smaller in the daylight coming through the bay's high windows. Smaller and younger and more fragile than anything that should ever have been left out in the rain. He pulled his jacket off the hook by the door and put it on. Then he stepped outside the bay and waited. The elder did not take long. He came across the dock floor with 2 attendants flanking him and a station escort trailing behind looking deeply uncomfortable. He was tall, taller than most Dravith Ethan had seen, and his scales were deep charcoal gray, thick and hard and layered like old armor. His horns were long and swept back, and around his neck he wore a heavy chain of dark metal with a clan seal hanging from it the size of a grown man's fist. His eyes were amber, pale amber, almost colorless, and they moved across the maintenance bay door and then across Ethan with the same flat expression. He stopped 3 meters away. He did not introduce himself. He simply looked at Ethan for a moment the way someone looks at an obstacle in a corridor, something to be moved, not spoken to. Then he spoke. His translator device rendered his words in flat, clean standard, each syllable precise and entirely without warmth. He said the pale hatchling found on Dock 14 was the property of Clan Vorak. He said it had been identified by its scale coloration as a paleborn, which was a known defect in the bloodline and a matter of internal clan business. He said Ethan was to step aside immediately, surrender the creature, and file no further reports regarding the incident. He said this would be the cleanest resolution for everyone involved. He said the word cleanest the way people say it when they mean something that has nothing to do with clean at all. Ethan stood in the doorway of Bay 7 with his hands at his sides and his shoulders level and he listened to all of it without moving. When the elder finished, Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, simply and without any heat in his voice, that the hatchling was under his protection. The elder's pale amber eyes did not change. He repeated himself, slower this time, as if Ethan had perhaps not understood the words the first time. He said the hatchling belonged to the clan. He said a human maintenance worker had no standing to claim guardianship over a Dravith creature. He said this matter had already been communicated to the Spaceport administration and would be resolved through proper channels within the hour. Ethan nodded slowly. He said that was fine. He said the elder was welcome to speak to administration. He said that while that conversation was happening, the hatchling would remain exactly where she was, warm and treated and sleeping, and that nobody was going to enter Bay 7 until he personally decided otherwise. One of the attendants shifted forward half a step. Ethan looked at him. Just looked, steady and unhurried, and the attendant stopped. The elder's expression shifted then. Not much. A slight tightening around the jaw, a degree of change in the angle of his head. He was not used to being told no by anyone, and he was certainly not used to being told no by a human technician standing in a maintenance bay doorway without so much as raising his voice. He told Ethan that interfering with clan business carried serious consequences. He told him that Clan Vorik had substantial contracts with Vero Station administration and that a single complaint from the clan could end Ethan's posting here before the day was out. He told him that the Paleborn was not what Ethan imagined it to be. It was not a lost child. It was not an innocent creature in need of rescue. It was an omen, pale from birth, which in Dravith tradition signified misfortune for the clan that bore it. It needed to be returned so the clan could handle the matter according to their own laws and customs. Ethan listened to all of this the same way he had listened to the first part. Then he said one sentence. He said he understood what the elder was telling him, and his answer was still no. He did not say it loudly. He did not lean forward or set his jaw or make any of the gestures that people make when they are trying to look threatening. He stood exactly as he had been standing since the elder arrived, hands at his sides, weight even, completely still. The stillness was not the stillness of someone holding themselves back. It was simply the stillness of someone who had already made up his mind and saw no reason to perform anything about it. The elder stared at him for a long moment. Behind the elder, the station escort had gone very quiet and was looking at the floor. Then the elder turned, the chain around his neck swinging with the motion, and he walked away across the dock floor with his two attendants falling in behind him. He did not look back. His footsteps rang loud and even against the metal floor and then faded as he turned the corner toward the main corridor. Ethan watched him go. Then he turned and went back inside the bay and closed the door behind him. The hatchling had not woken. She was exactly as he had left her, curled on the thermal blanket with her pale wings loose at her sides and her breathing slow and deep. One small claw was hooked loosely over the edge of the blanket as if she had reached for something in her sleep and found it close enough. Ethan sat back down on his stool. He picked up his diagnostic pad and opened a new file. He began typing carefully and in full detail, everything that had happened from the moment he found her on the dock to the conversation that had just ended outside his door. Dates, times, names where he had them, exact words where he remembered them. If this was going to administration, he was going to be ready. He typed until the hatchling stirred, and when she opened her golden eyes and found him sitting exactly where he had been, she made a soft low sound and closed them again. Ethan kept typing. The summons came 2 hours after the elder left. Ethan had been expecting it. He had kept his diagnostic pad open and his document running, adding to it steadily while the hatchling slept and the morning shift began moving across the docks outside. When the official message arrived from Commander Sarah Voss requesting his presence in the administration block at the 3rd level, he read it, saved his document, and made 2 copies on separate storage chips which he put in different pockets. He looked at the hatchling before he left. She was awake now, sitting up on the thermal blanket with her pale wings half open and her golden eyes moving slowly around the bay, taking in the shelves of equipment and the hanging tool lines and the wide work bench with the careful attention of a creature seeing the world for the first time and trying to understand all of it at once. When Ethan moved toward the door she tracked him immediately, her head turning, her eyes fixing on him with an intensity that was startling in something so small and so young. He told her he would be back. He did not know if she understood. But she watched the door for a long moment after it closed, and then she settled back down onto the thermal blanket and tucked her nose under her tail, and the bay was quiet. Commander Sarah Voss had been running Vero Station for 11 years and she had the look of someone who had dealt with a very large number of very difficult situations and was tired of all of them. She was a compact woman with short gray hair and a permanent slight frown that Ethan had always privately thought was less about displeasure and more about concentration. She was sitting behind her desk when he came in, and across from her, in the wide chair to the left, sat the Dravith elder. His attendants were not with him this time. Just him, filling the chair with his gray-scaled bulk, his pale amber eyes moving to Ethan the moment he entered the room. Commander Voss did not waste time. She told Ethan that Clan Vorik had filed a formal claim with station administration for the return of a hatchling currently being held in Maintenance Bay 7. She told him the clan had significant operational contracts with Vero Station and that their request carried legal weight under standard commercial partnership agreements. She told him she needed him to explain his position clearly and quickly because she had 3 other problems waiting for her attention before midday. Ethan reached into his left pocket and set one of the storage chips on her desk. He told her the full document was on the chip but that he could summarize the relevant points verbally if she preferred. She nodded once. He summarized. He told her the time and location of the rescue, the condition of the hatchling when found, the treatment administered, and the absence of any clan scent marker on the creature indicating she had not been claimed at birth. He told her about the Elder's visit to the bay and the exact words that had been used, including the phrase clan resolution, which he repeated carefully and let sit in the air of the office for a moment without adding anything to it. Commander Voss's frown deepened slightly. Then Ethan reached into his right pocket and took out the second storage chip. He set it beside the first. He told her the second chip contained the full text of Interstellar Protection Statute 14, Section 9, Paragraph 3, which he had pulled from the station legal database at approximately 4 in the morning. He summarized that too. He said the statute was clear. Any sapient creature of any recognized species found in a condition of medical distress, without active clan, family, or organizational representation present at the time of rescue, defaulted automatically to the protective guardianship of the individual who performed the rescue. He said this guardianship was legally binding for a minimum of 30 days and could not be superseded by retroactive clan claims filed after the fact. He said the hatchling had shown clear indicators of sapient awareness including deliberate communication attempts and responsive tracking behavior, which met the threshold for sapience classification under the same statute. He said he had also noted that no missing hatchling report had been filed with station security at any point during the night, which under the same statute was taken as evidence that the creature had not been lost but had been deliberately abandoned, which elevated his guardianship status from temporary to provisional. The office was very quiet. Commander Voss looked at the 2 chips on her desk. Then she looked at Ethan. Then she looked at the Elder. The Elder spoke. His voice was controlled but there was something underneath the control now, something compressed and tight. He said the statute Ethan was citing applied to wild creatures and did not cover clan-born Dravith hatchlings who fell under their own species' internal legal framework. He said the Paleborn was a clan matter and no human quoting station law had the authority to override Dravith custom. Commander Voss held up one hand. She said she appreciated the clan's position and she understood the importance of cultural custom. She said she also understood that Vero Station operated under interstellar jurisdiction and that her authority on this station was governed by interstellar law, not by any single species' internal framework. She said that if the clan wished to contest the statute Ethan had cited they were welcome to file a challenge with the Interstellar Legal Commission on Haver Station, which typically processed such challenges in 4 to 7 months. She picked up both storage chips and set them in her intake tray. Then she told Ethan that pending any successful legal challenge, which she noted was entirely the clan's right to pursue, the hatchling in Maintenance Bay 7 was to remain in his care under the terms of Statute 14, Section 9. She told him he would be required to file weekly welfare reports with the station medical office and that the hatchling would need to be assessed by a registered species medic within 72 hours. She said that was her ruling. She said it the way she said everything, flat and final and without drama, and then she looked back down at her desk and picked up her next file because she had 3 other problems waiting and none of them were going to solve themselves. The Elder stood. He did not speak again. He looked at Ethan once, a long cold look that carried everything he wanted to say without any of the words, and then he walked out of the office and his footsteps went hard and fast down the corridor outside and did not slow until they were too far away to hear. Ethan thanked the commander. She told him to file the welfare report on time and not to make her regret the ruling. He told her she would not. He meant it. He walked back to Bay 7 through the mid-morning bustle of the station, past cargo crews and fuel technicians and a group of Dravith traders who did not look up as he passed. He keyed open the bay door and stepped inside. The hatchling was not on the workbench. His heart moved sideways for one sharp second before he looked down and found her on the floor beside the bench, investigating the leg of his spare equipment bag with great seriousness, pressing her nose against it and pulling back and pressing again. He let out a slow breath. She looked up at him when she heard it, and something in her expression shifted, a small and subtle change that he was already learning to read. She crossed the floor to him in an unsteady four-legged walk, still getting used to her own legs, and she pushed her pale head against his shin once and then turned and walked back toward the bench. That night he left his old jacket on the thermal blanket beside her because the temperature dropped after midnight and he had a newer one on the hook by the door. In the morning the jacket was still on the blanket. She was curled on top of it with both small forelegs wrapped around the sleeve, her pale wings tucked in close, her breathing deep and steady and entirely unbothered by the world. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her. Then he went to put the kettle on and start the morning welfare report. 3 weeks passed quietly. Sila grew fast. Not in size, not yet, but in everything else. In confidence and curiosity and the particular boldness that comes from a young creature discovering that the world around it is mostly safe and occasionally very interesting. She had claimed the maintenance bay as her territory within the first week, investigating every corner and shelf and cabinet with her nose and her small clever claws, and by the second week she had developed clear opinions about which spots were acceptable and which were not. The thermal blanket with Ethan's old jacket was acceptable. The floor near the warm exhaust vent on the south wall was acceptable. The top of the tall equipment locker was acceptable, and she got up there by the fourth day by climbing the shelving unit beside it in a series of determined scrambling leaps that Ethan watched with his heart in his throat and his hands hovering uselessly 2 feet below her. His stool was not acceptable. That was hers now. Her burns had healed cleanly. The dark patches had faded over the first week until they were barely visible, and by the second week they were gone entirely, her pale scales growing back smooth and unmarked. The station medic, a tired Helvari woman named Dr. Ozen who had seen everything twice and was surprised by nothing, had examined Sila on the second day and declared the treatment adequate and the recovery trajectory good. She had also noted, without any particular emotion, that pale-born Dravith hatchlings were extraordinarily rare and that the last recorded case in this sector had been over 60 years ago. She said it the way scientists say things they find remarkable but have trained themselves not to show. Ethan filed his weekly welfare reports on time, every time, with thorough notes and accurate observations. Commander Voss never commented on them. But they were always marked received within minutes of being submitted, which told him she was reading them. No further contact came from Clan Vorak. Ethan did not think about that too much. He thought about it a little, the way you think about a sound you heard in the night that did not repeat. But Sila was eating well and sleeping well and getting steadily more complicated to keep occupied, and that took up most of his available thinking. He had started bringing things for her. Small things. A smooth piece of engine casing she liked to push across the floor. A length of braided cable she carried everywhere for a week and then lost interest in. A flat piece of reflective panel that she sat in front of for long minutes at a time, tilting her head at the pale creature looking back at her from the surface. He had named her on the 5th day. It had not been a planned decision. He had been sitting on the floor of the bay, back against the bench, eating his lunch, and she had climbed into his lap uninvited and settled there with the complete confidence of someone who has decided that a particular place belongs to them. He had looked down at her, pale and small and entirely self-assured, and the word had come to him from somewhere he could not quite identify. Sila. It was from an old language, one his grandmother had spoken and taught him pieces of when he was very young. It meant the breath that gives life to the world. The air that moves through everything and keeps it living. He had said it quietly, just to himself, just to try how it sat. She had looked up at him immediately. Not the way she looked at sounds or movements, with alert animal attention. Something different. Something that felt, though he could not have explained why, like recognition. He had called her Sila every day since then and she came to it every time. It was on a Tuesday morning in the 4th week that Thessera arrived. Ethan was replacing a worn coupling on the bay's ventilation unit when he heard the knock. It was a different knock from the official ones he had learned to recognize, 2 sharp raps from station security or the slow deliberate single knock of Dr. Ozen. This one was lighter. Almost hesitant. He opened the door. She was young, younger than he had expected from a diplomat, with scales the color of deep water, dark blue-green that shifted slightly in the dock lighting. Her horns were short, still coming in, and she wore no clan chain around her neck, only a small diplomatic identification badge on her collar. She was holding a flat data folder against her chest with both hands and she was looking at him with an expression that was carefully composed but not quite successful at hiding the nervousness underneath it. She told him her name was Thessera. She said she was attached to the Dravith diplomatic office at Vero Station. She said she was not there on official business. Ethan stepped back from the door and opened it wider. She came in slowly, and then she stopped. Sila was on the equipment locker. She was lying on her stomach with her pale wings spread lazily on either side of her and her golden eyes fixed on Thessera with the focused, unblinking attention she gave to anything new that entered her space. Her tail moved once, a slow deliberate sweep, and was still. Thessera stared at her. She said something in Dravith, very quietly, not through the translator. Ethan did not know the words but he recognized the tone. It was the tone of someone who has heard something described and is now seeing it and finding that the description did not come close. Then Thessera looked back at Ethan and she composed herself and she said what she had come to say. She told him that in Dravith culture, there was an old law, older than clan structures and older than any diplomatic agreement currently in writing. She said it was called the First Breath Bond. She said it held that the one who shelters a hatchling in its first vulnerable hours, who takes the rain and the cold on their own body so the hatchling does not have to, is bound to that hatchling permanently. Not as an owner. Not as a keeper. She paused and chose her next word carefully. As kin. She said she had come to tell him this because she felt he deserved to know what he had stepped into. She said she expected it would be surprising and possibly alarming and that she was prepared to answer any questions he had. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. It was a small and genuine smile, the kind that comes without effort, and he told Thessera that he appreciated her coming to tell him in person. He told her the hatchling had a name. Thessera asked what name. He said Sila. He said it meant the breath that gives life to the world, from an old language his grandmother had taught him. Thessera went completely still. The data folder she was holding lowered slowly until her arms were at her sides. She looked at Ethan with an expression he had not seen on a Dravith face before, something wide open and unguarded that had moved past surprise into something much deeper. He asked her if something was wrong. She said no. She said nothing was wrong. She said that in the oldest form of the Dravith naming right, the one practiced before clan records and formal registration existed, a hatchling was given its true name by the one who bonded with it in the first breath hours. She said the name was always drawn from the namer's own heritage, their own language, their own history. She said the name was always chosen not for how it sounded but for what it meant, and it was always chosen to reflect what the hatchling had already shown itself to be. She looked at Sila on top of the locker, pale and calm and quietly luminous in the bay light. She said the rite had not been performed in living memory. She said most Dravith believed it had been lost. She said Ethan had performed it perfectly. Above them, Sila stretched her pale wings out to their full small span, yawned with a great show of small sharp teeth, and settled back down with her chin resting on the edge of the locker and her golden eyes half closed and entirely content. Ethan looked up at her. Then he looked back at Thessera and asked if she wanted a cup of tea, because he had a kettle and he had been about to make one anyway, and it seemed like they probably had quite a lot to talk about. Thessera looked at him for a moment. Then she said yes. She sat down on the stool that was technically Sila's, and Sila allowed it without complaint, and the three of them stayed in the warm quiet of the maintenance bay while the station moved and hummed around them, and outside the dock windows the sky over Viros was clear and pale gold and entirely without rain.